Chapter 31. All right, so now we're moving way forward in time. We ended with my last video. That was, he was, I don't even know. Let me figure out what I'm trying to say here. So Dante was watching Morel's boat come into harbor, the new Pharaoh. He had just completely blessed Morel and his family. So he did them some good, and then Dante left on his yacht. So we don't know where he's going, on some other crazy adventure, maybe to go seek revenge or maybe to go bless someone else who has helped him in his life too. Let's find out. So anyway, some time has passed. It is now 1838. We're moving a little bit forward in time. And some of these chapters really do skip forward in time. So kind of be mindful of dates and also be mindful of the descriptions of Dante, because you'll hear again things like, this looked like a man in his mid-30s, or this looked like a man in his late 40s. He grows up. We kind of grow up with him a little bit. So we are now focused on some new characters. Oh, shoot. New characters to remember. We got this. Okay, first character is going to be Viscount Albert de Morcerf. Mind you, we've heard this name before. Maybe not in its entirety, but we've heard of little baby Albert. And we've also heard of a Count de Morcerf. Let me remind you. Remember Fernand? Fernand is that man who was in love with Mercedes, Dante's girlfriend. Dante's fiance, actually. So Fernand loved her. They eventually got married. And Fernand also eventually inherited a lot of money from a guy named Ali Pasha that he worked under. And Fernand changed his name, the Count de Morcerf. And so he got married to Mercedes. They had a kid named Albert. So this is their kid. Viscount Albert de Morcerf. I will call him Albert. Okay? So remember that. The other person we need to remember, or the other person we need to keep in mind, I guess, of this in this chapter, in these next few chapters, I should say, is a man named Baron Franz de Epinay. We do not know who this is right now. We'll see later on if there is a connection. And as I've told you before, there are connections in every sort of way in this story. It's crazy. You could probably make one of those like giant crime boards and just have different strings attached to different faces and different things like that for this story. I think that'd be a neat project, actually. So Franz is probably the correct way to say it. Franz and Albert are buddies. They are going to Carnival in Rome. So they're friends. They want to go do some celebrating. Franz will be the tour guide for his buddy Albert, as Franz has been in Italy for a few years. And he's like, I know my way around. I will guide us there. However, they are not quite in Rome yet. So they have a little bit of time before they have to be in there for Carnival. And so they want to go blow off some steam. And so before heading to Rome, Albert heads to Naples, and Franz, on a whim, decides he wants to go to the Isle of Elba. Because why not? I don't know. I don't understand his reasonings, but he just seems like he's a guy that likes to go on adventures and seek out thrills. So he's like, let's go to the Isle of Elba. Let's do it. And so on his way, because of course he just does this, they're both very rich, by the way. So they've got the means to kind of do what they want to do. So he gets this boat, he rents it, he's on his way to the Isle of Elba. He and the other guys on the boat are like, oh, look, there's the island of Monte Cristo. And Franz is like, I kind of want to stop there. I think that'd be kind of cool. Maybe we should stop. But the captain taking him there is like, we would have to go into quarantine for 5 days for when we get back. It's considered an infected island. And Franz is like, well, who would know that I'd go to the island of Monte Cristo? And the captain and everyone else on the boat's like, I won't tell anyone. And so Franz is like, cool, I'm not going into quarantine, but let's go to the island. Let's do it. So Franz is very impulsive. It's kind of the feeling we get from the start of the chapter. He does what he wants to do. He's got the money to do it. And it also seems he has some influence, maybe because of his money. I don't know. And so everyone on board is like, let's go. And so they talk about what this island is known for. It's known for this area where smugglers come, where pirates come. It's kind of like a neutral spot where things go down. Just a lot of sketchiness. And so they get closer, they see a fire on the island. And they also notice that this fire is only visible from the sea. So it's like someone's trying to kind of hide themselves here. It's not visible from any other locations. So this is something that the captain's like, you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take a closer look. And so he gets closer to the island, and the captain gets out of the boat, swims to shore, and he's like, I'm going to go take a look. And so it's found out that the captain does know some smugglers. And so it's like, okay, maybe the captain will know these people. And so, brave guy, he goes out there. He comes back. He's like, I do know them. It turns out these are some Spanish smugglers. They also have 2 Corsican bandits with them. And so because he knows them, Franz is like, well, should we go? Like, should we seek their hospitality? And the captain's like, sure, why not? Let's go. And so they go over there. They're welcomed. Nothing seems weird. Nothing seems sketchy, even though these men sound like smugglers, bandits. They sound like they'd be kind of sketchy. So that one man one man called the chief, that's what they refer to him. One of those smugglers, we can assume. He invites Franz to go eat with him. So he asks if he can dine with him that evening. However, there is one requirement that the chief requests of Franz, and he says, you need to wear a blindfold. I will take you to the place we will be dining, but you will be blindfolded, and you can only take it off when I tell you to. And the captain hears this, and he's like, Franz, come here, let me tell you something. And so he's like, I've heard about the chief's like special area that he has, this little cavern that's filled with incredible items, filled with wonders. You gotta go. It sounds so cool. I've heard all these rumors. So Franz is like, I'm game. Remember, this guy likes adventure. He likes doing things that not everyone would do. And so he's like, I'm totally in. And so Franz asks about, this is kind of in the meantime before dinner. He asks about the boat that these men came in on because he did not see a boat. Turns out they have a yacht. Where have we seen a yacht before? That's right. Dante's got a yacht. So that's a little bit weird. So, and I don't know about you guys, but maybe you had the same assumption that I had when I was reading this, but I was like, the chief has to be Dante. It's just got to be Dante. Because Dante is head honcho wherever he is. He's got this power, this influence. He's a great guy. And he just knows how to sway people. And so I was like, he has to be the chief. And so, kind of interesting. And the sailor who's also kind of talking to Franz, he's telling him about their boat. He also says, this is weird. You say that we're smugglers? Where did you hear that? The chief is not a smuggler. The chief is, and I'm going to quote this, I wrote this down, a wealthy señor who travels for his pleasure. Again, immediately in my mind, I was like, Dante. It's got to be Dante. He also, fun thing, calls himself Sinbad the Sailor. Okay, there should be no doubt in your mind anymore that this chief, this Sinbad the Sailor, is Dante. It's Edmond Dante. He's on the island. Of course he's on this island. His treasure was on this island, so he knows it quite well. So maybe this is his own little home base for him. Either way. So then it was time for supper. Franz has a blindfold put on him. By the time he's able to take it off, he looks around. It's a beautiful place that he's in. Sinbad the Sailor also is described as kind of an attractive man, in his late 30s. Again, he's growing up here. Also very pale. So they're, like I said, in a very beautiful, richly decorated chamber. A Nubian man serves them dinner. Now, this is important to note. A Nubian man is what it was called, is an African man. And so he was from, I think it was like southern Egypt kind of region in Africa. And so this is a black man serving them dinner. His name is Ali. We learn a little bit about him. We learn also that Ali got in trouble because he wandered too close to a harem, which would be a place where it would be a place where women who are all married to the same man live. And so if a man wanders too close to such a location, they can get in trouble. But if it's a black man, unfortunately, they could get in more trouble. And so this individual got in trouble. He was told that he would have his tongue and his hand and his head cut off. So he was going to die. And somehow Sinbad had heard about this and was very interested in having someone who could not speak working for him, which I feel like makes sense because Dante has a lot of secrets, he has a lot of schemes, and if someone can't speak and works for him, that's great. They can't share his secrets, they can't say anything that they shouldn't have said. So this is awesome. So he winds up saving Ali. He trades Ali for it's like a double-barreled shotgun, and so he gets Ali after his tongue has been cut off. So he's got his hand, obviously he has his head, and he is essentially the slave for Sinbad the Sailor, so for Dante. So we're starting to be introduced to Dante's squad that he has here. So we've got Ali. So the two of them, Dante, gosh, I'm gonna call him Sinbad now. Sinbad and Franz, they sit down for dinner. It's delicious. They continue talking. Um, Franz also is, I'm not sure if intuitive is the right word, but he's very good at understanding people just by looking at them. And so Franz sees Sinbad and he's like, you seem like a man who's been through a lot. And you also seem like a man who has something maybe he wants to do to someone, like maybe revenge, retribution. And Sinbad's like, good guesses, but you're wrong about all of them. But I don't know. Maybe one day I'll go and visit the mainland. Maybe one day I'll go and visit Paris. Maybe one day I'll go and, I don't know. I'll just go on some adventures. But really, I haven't been through that much. I don't want to seek revenge. Like, whatever happens, happens. I have nothing to do with it. Which we know is a big fat lie. Because we know that Dante is wanting to seek revenge. He is wanting to pay back people for good or for worse. So interesting. So he's lying to Franz, which is not a surprise because he's dressed as a man named Sinbad and he's on an island and there's weird things. It's like he's dug himself into the strange hole. So other things that you get into, they have conversations. Franz says that if you do wind up going to Paris one day, that's great. I'd love to repay you for your kindness that you've shown here on the island of Monte Cristo. So maybe I can, I don't know, show you around or just do something to help out there. And Sinbad says that if he goes to Paris, he'll likely be disguised. So no need to do anything kind for me. I'm going to maybe go there, but I'm not going to look like myself. And so Franz is like, okay, cool. Dinner keeps passing. They share in the splendor of hashish, which is part of the cannabis plant and is a mind-altering drug. And so this is some sort of wonderful splendor that Sinbad has that he'd like to share with Franz. And so he shares some of his hashish with Franz. They both get stupid high and they fall asleep. And so that's the end of the chapter. So they did have a nice dinner together. They had good conversation. Sinbad is a very curious character, and Franz is very good at guessing things about people. And so end of that chapter is when they're just asleep, just totally out of it. Chapter 32 is Franz waking up, and he wakes up in a grotto on the island of Monte Cristo. So he's no longer in this beautiful chamber. He's no longer with Sinbad. He wakes up and he's like, wow, I feel really refreshed. I remember what happened yesterday, but where is Sinbad? And so he learns that Sinbad had to leave on important business calls, and he sees Sinbad sailing away and shouting adieu to him from his yacht. And so, very curious character. Sinbad's a weird duck, which we already knew. So, Franz tried to get back to the chamber that he had been in last night. So he's like, okay, he's gone. Maybe I can find this really cool chamber. I want to show this crew, this captain that told me about it from the boat. I want to show them where it is. And he tries to search for it, and he tries and tries and tries in vain, and he just cannot find it. So, and then the captain's like, like, we're not going to leave yet. You told me you wanted to go to this island. You told me you also wanted to maybe shoot some goats around here. And Franz is like, oh, yeah. But Franz has basically already had his fun. He had this crazy evening with a really weird dude, mysterious character, and he's ready to go. But he's like, whatever. I did tell the captain I wanted to shoot some goats here, so I'll shoot some goats. So he killed some goats. Let's see. I'm trying to see what kind of important information you guys need to know. He's on the island. Oh, something else that we should note here. So Sinbad, remember that he was with bandits and maybe a couple other smugglers. He is taking his yacht because it is noted in the book. Franz is like, why is Sinbad sailing that way? I thought he was going in a different direction. The captain was like, oh, remember he had those Corsican bandits with him. He's just driving, or he's just boating them back to their home. And so, good guy Sinbad. But it's good to note that Sinbad, aka Dante, has really good relations with smugglers and bandits. So he's gotten in with kind of this rough crowd, but maybe it'll serve him some good in the future. But we also know this because remember, fresh out of prison, fresh out of Chateau d'If, he joined on a crew with a bunch of smugglers. So he helped them smuggle things, and that's how he got to know all these smugglers. So things are starting to make a little bit more sense with the kind of company that he keeps. So eventually, Franz and this crew, they sail back to shore. They find their way back to Rome to go meet up with Albert. So at the hotel, they get into it with the guy that owns the hotel. This guy's name is Pastrini, and they want a carriage. And mind you, this is during Carnival. This is this major time in Rome where people have celebrations. They get all dressed up. There's just a lot of dancing, events in the streets. A lot of people flock to Rome for this. And so there are no carriages anywhere. And so Pastrini's like, I'll do my best. I'll do what I can for you, but like no guarantees right now. And that's how we ended the chapter. At their hotel, they want a carriage for tomorrow because they want to go ahead and start looking around Rome, seeing what there is to see before Carnival officially gets underway. So exciting stuff. Chapter 33. We're getting there. We have, of course, difficulty in obtaining a carriage, but we managed to get one for the two men. And so Albert and Franz go to St. Peter's for the day as a church. And we don't need to really get into that, but once they arrive home, they eat. Pastrini comes in. Let me remind you, Pastrini is the owner of the hotel, and he warns them about traveling in and around the city. He tells them to avoid a particular route because the next day they're going to the Colosseum, which I believe is like on the outskirts of Rome, or it's either on the outskirts or it's like just at the edge of Rome. So either way, it's just right at that kind of edge of the city. And so Pastrini's like, there is this terrible bandit. His name is Luigi Vampa. Another character for us to remember, Luigi Vampa. That one's a hard name to forget. So Luigi, he launches into this crazy story about this terrible bandit, all the things that he did, his humble beginnings, and how he rose to power. And so Albert and Franz are like, I don't know, he seems like a fictional character. I think you're making him up. But he keeps telling his story, and so he's like, then Luigi did this, then he got in trouble with this guy, then this would happen. Read the chapter. I'm not going to go through the entire tale, but the gist of it is you need to know that Luigi came to power. He eventually killed the ruler of a group of bandits, and so he became the ruler of the bandits after that man died. And another important thing to note is that in this very long story, mind you, Pastrini talks about how Luigi Vampa is helped out by a man in just one random scene. And this man's name was Sinbad the Sailor. And so at this, Franz hears it and he's like, Sinbad the Sailor. I know Sinbad the Sailor. I've heard this man. I met him on the island. What? What in the world? And so this seems weird. So either way, at the end of the story, Franz and Albert are like, okay, cool story, buddy. But Franz still has in the back of his head the name Sinbad the Sailor and the name Luigi Vampa. So he's like, weird connections. Still don't know if that story was true. Pastrini's a weird dude. He owns his hotel. Maybe he's just trying to tell us stories because we're not from Rome. Completely plausible. So they end the day and they leave. So chapter 34. Let's see. What do I want to tell you about chapter 34? Chapter 33 is long because of that story. Chapter 34 is basically the one about the Colosseum. So remember they wanted to go to the Colosseum on the border of town. Franz, let's see. Okay, I wrote it down over here. However, I will tell you that the text that I'm having you read and the text that um, we have for the school is a little bit different. And so this is one of those chapters where I did not read it in the original text or in the one for school. And so this is something that's like, wow, I didn't know this chapter was added on. So it was very new to me too. So I read this for the first time with you all this week. So in this chapter, we have the Colosseum. Franz and Albert get there. Albert is kind of taken by, well, they're both taken by a guide. And Franz is like, I'm going to stay back here. And he just lets Albert walk with the guide. And the reason for that is Franz is like, I just love the view of the Colosseum. And so Franz kind of stays up the back of the Colosseum. He's looking over everything. He's like, wow, this is beautiful. And he's also kind of tucked away. So Franz is just kind of sitting here enjoying the view. Albert's down there with the guide, learning officially about the Colosseum. And all of a sudden, Franz, in kind of where he's sitting, he sees a man kind of approach. So this man doesn't see Franz where he's sitting, but this man kind of comes over. He's like standing here, looking around, looking impatient. And the man is well dressed, but we don't really see what he looks like, other than the fact that he seems kind of impatient. And so we also see a man come down the roof of the Colosseum, hop off the side of the roof, and stand next to the man. So the man who looked impatient now was like, oh, there you are, kind of a thing. And so he was waiting for whoever this weird man is that just came off the roof. So the two men start chatting, and Franz is in this really cool position where he can just hear everything that's going on. And so the one on the roof shares that there will be 2 executions happening tomorrow in Rome. Okay, cool. One of them being executed is a man named Peppino, and this seems to have some sort of significance to the man who is well dressed, the one who looked really impatient. It's like, oh, Peppino. Oh, okay. They're talking about these executions. We learn also that Peppino, the one who's going to be executed tomorrow, helped the man from the roof, the man who was on the roof, he helped him in the past. And so the man on the roof is like, you've got to help Peppino, telling this to the well-dressed man. And now from this kind of assumption where it's like, okay, he helped him in the past, man's coming down off the roof, seems kind of shady. We just learned about Luigi Vampa. Could it be that this guy's Luigi Vampa? This book is all about having to read between the lines and figure out who is who. So right now, I'm going to say Luigi Vampa. So the well-dressed man says, I'll go ahead and help get Peppino pardoned. I also want you to know that I will give you a sign to show you if I was able to successfully do this. He says that he has a couple of windows that he's gone ahead and reserved to watch the execution. Well, I know that sounds weird, but in Rome, executions were more of a public ordeal. So the public would come and watch executions. And so this well-dressed man is saying, I rented a couple windows to watch the execution. On these windows, I have draperies, and I'm going to put these draperies in a certain way. If Peppino has not been pardoned, I'll put them in a different way if he has been pardoned, okay? And so this man who came off the roof is like, great, sounds good. Get him pardoned. Let's do this. And so we're at this point also where it's like, is the well-dressed man, is this someone we've met before? And so we continue to read. It sounds like things will go well. It sounds like Peppino will be pardoned by this well-dressed man. And we also learn, so these two leave. That was all their conversation was about. Well-dressed man will go ahead and pardon some guy named Peppino that helped out this sketchy guy, maybe Luigi. At the end of it, Franz rejoins Albert. Franz doesn't say anything to Albert. Albert's just like, oh yeah, here's how my guide went. This was great. This was so fun. And then we get to read Albert's thoughts a little bit. And Franz realizes that the well-dressed man was Sinbad the sailor. So Dante, again. And so kind of strange, we're also starting to realize that maybe the stories about Luigi Vampa were real. Because remember, the stories about Luigi Vampa had to do with Sinbad the sailor. And if that was Sinbad the sailor in person, who Franz recognizes, then it's got to be true that that Luigi Vampa is this dangerous bandit. So weird things. Okay, let's see what happens. Also, why is Sinbad the sailor in town? What? So did he just hurry into Rome instead of dropping off these other bandits? What is happening? So kind of weird stuff. Albert and Franz are together. They decide that they want to go to the opera the next night. We get a little bit of insight on Albert. And so Albert, we learn, loves women. He wants to find a woman somewhere in Rome, even though he's starting to realize that all the Roman women here, they just love their lovers or they love their husbands, and they're very loyal to those around them and not to people like Albert, who are outsiders. So Albert loves women. He's also like, I am an eligible bachelor, so why can't I find a woman? So we've got that. And then we have them going to the opera. And I apologize, this video is a little bit more rambly than usual. I know this. Like I said, this whole section of the text is not one that I'm as familiar with. So stick with me here. Once they're in Rome and they're getting into all sorts of Roman things with Carnival, that's where things kind of pick up from me. So I'll do my best to kind of make that clear to you. But anyway, they go to the theater. There is a woman that Franz recognizes who comes into the theater as well. They're in kind of a nice box, and so she's in a box kind of nearby. Albert sees this woman and is like, Franz, look at her. And Franz is like, oh, I actually know her from Paris. That's weird that she's here. And so Albert's like, introduce me, obviously. And so they go into her box. They sit beside her. She insists that they sit there. And so they just strike up a conversation. They're just having a good time chatting with her. And so they are looking around, or excuse me, Franz is looking around because Albert and this woman are having a conversation. So that's good. Those two are kind of hitting it off. Franz is peeking around. He's got his little spyglass. I don't think that's the right term. Whatever that little like binocular thing is that they use in the theater. So he's looking around in the opera and he spies this beautiful woman and he just like cannot handle himself. He's like, oh my gosh. And he like is poking this woman beside him. She's Countess G, I think is her name. It is her name. We don't get the full name though. It's just G something. But Franz is like poking her shoulder and is like, who is that lady over there? She is so pretty. And she's like, all the info I know is that she's been in Rome for the season. She's often seen with another man who she's with right now. And she's sometimes with a black servant. She's with what? A black servant. Now, this should have some significance to us. Is Dante in every single scene in this book? Apparently he is. So remember, he has his black Nubian servant, Ali. Weird. Okay. And so Franz couldn't clearly see the man beside her, even though he's kind of trying to get a good look. He's like, who is this man that's with this beautiful woman? And so finally this man stands up. I think something's happening. The curtain went down. Man stands up and he's like, oh my gosh. Sinbad's here again. Sinbad is everywhere. Sinbad is everywhere. So yes, Dante is in basically every scene in this book. I'm sorry to say. I'm not sorry to say. He's crazy. So Dante is in this scene. He is with this beautiful woman. And so Franz pokes the woman next to him, Countess G again. He's like, hey, do you know that man? Do you know that one over there, the one with the beautiful woman? And she's like, I think he's a vampire. That's basically all the info you need to know from Countess G. All she thinks is he's a vampire. He looks very pale. He seems kind of odd. And she's like, you know, if you're interested in pursuing him, like talking to him, don't do it around me. He's creepy. He's weird. I don't want anything to do with it. And so Franz is like, okay, I won't do anything with you around. Because at this point, if you're Franz and you keep seeing this man around, you're going to be a little bit curious. And Franz is very curious. So Franz arrives back at the hotel. Pastrini lets him in, and lets him in, and he lets him and Albert know that staying on the same floor as them in their hotel is a man named the Count of Monte Cristo. What? And I know at this point, there are so many characters, you're probably like, I'm done. I don't want to have to remember any more characters. However, let's move on. The book is called The Count of Monte Cristo, so this is a character we know at least that we can kind of stick with in our minds. So in this hotel, staying there for Carnival is a man named the Count of Monte Cristo. Cool. And the Count of Monte Cristo heard about how Albert and Franz were not able to get a good carriage for Carnival. And he has offered to let them use his carriage. So that sounds kind of cool. And also, the Count of Monte Cristo sends a servant to say, hey, the Count of Monte Cristo wants to meet with you. Whatever time works, tomorrow would be great. And so they agree to the carriage. They are excited. They'll meet the Count later. So the next morning, Franz asks Pastrini about the execution that's happening the next day because Franz is smart. Remember this. He's a tricky dude. And so the reason he's asking him about the execution is he is trying to confirm that what he heard between Sinbad and Luigi is true. And so Pastrini's like, oh yeah, here's a description of the executions that are happening today. Here are the two men. And so sure enough, on that list is Peppino. And so he's like, oh, interesting. So I guess they were talking about an actual execution that's happening and one of the men who really is being executed. So he's like, I guess time will just have to tell whether or not Peppino will be pardoned by Sinbad. And so at this point now, it is time to meet the Count of Monte Cristo. So they enter into a beautifully decorated apartment. It's Franz and Albert, and who else other than Sinbad would be standing right in front of them. So let's recap real quick before I end this video. Who has Dante dressed up as? We've got Dante as himself. We have Dante as, let's see, he was a sailor on a smuggler boat. We don't have a specific name for him. We have him as a priest when he went to go see Caderousse. We have him as a member of a banking firm, Thompson and French. And then we have him as Sinbad the sailor. Remember when he gave the note to Morel's daughter, Julie? And then when he was talking to Luigi Vampa, when he was on that island with Franz. And then now we have him as the Count of Monte Cristo. So maybe you can think of any other disguises, but right now I have 5. That's a lot of disguises. So, there's a lot. So now we are meeting the Count of Monte Cristo. We have Franz, we have Albert. Remember, Albert is the son of Fernand and Mercedes, so Albert is important. Franz, we don't really know his connection quite yet to anyone in our story, other than the fact that he knows that the Count of Monte Cristo is in fact Sinbad, and we also know that Sinbad has connections to Luigi Vampa. So Franz knows a lot more than anyone else in this story. I'm going to leave this video for right here. It's been long enough. You guys are great. Thanks for sticking with me. The next video, we'll wrap up the last 3-4 chapters. We'll start with chapter 35.